For people that have never been here before, I'll give you a rundown of how we run the meetings here, so you're aware. Typically have the developer make their presentation first. After they're done, the township engineer provides his comments to the plans that he's reviewed. So the next step would be public comment, where anybody that has any concerns or wishes to speak in the audience may do so. We will listen to everybody. Please provide your name and address when you step to the mic. The only thing that we ask is, don't repeat the same thing over and over again. If you agree with the person that spoke before you, just say you support their position. Next, the planning commission would have their questions and comments to the developer. After that, the planning commission would consider a possible action, which could be to deny the plan, to recommend approval, or to table it until next month. I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of things to discuss tonight, and I don't know if it'll be concluded tonight or carry on for another month. It's done. With that said, I would ask that the developer introduce the team and make their presentation.
Good evening, Mike.
On the bottom.
Testing, testing. I don't know that I actually need it.
You sound pretty good there. There.
I've never been accused of being quiet. Well, I'll start, and if anyone has trouble hearing me, just yell and I will speak up. My name is Kate Gaffner, and I'm here representing Olympus Energy LLC, and I'm here from K&L Gates. I'm with my colleague, Pierce Richardson. From Olympus, we have Brian Dillemuth, Anthony Miller, James Plant. And then from the project manager, from Michael Baker, we have Joe Blickenderfer. We have Tage Rosendahl, who is from Acoustical Control LLC, and Gary Steigel from Stahl Shaeffer. And so we expect to hear from many of them tonight. As a little bit of background, Olympus submitted its application on October 30th of 2019, and there was a land development application and a conditional use application for both the Leto and the Dionysus well pads. The Leto well pad is at 301 Oak Road in Gibsonia, and that's zoning district I industrial. And then the Dionysus well pad is at 1501 Middle Road Extension in Gibsonia, and that's the R2 semi-suburban residential zoning district. We were before you in November, on November 26th of 2019, and we gave our presentation. Since that date, we have received 2 sets of comment letters from Mr. Shoup. The first specifically relates to the land development plan applications, and then the second set more recently relate to the conditional use applications. Olympus has responded to both of those sets of comment letters, the latest being just this morning, so we will make sure that we address those issues. I also understand from your solicitor that there are a number of other topics that the Planning Commission would like us to address tonight, and so with the representatives that I have with me tonight, we'll make sure that we're going through all of those topics, and certainly we'll address any questions that you have in addition. And so first up, I have Joe Blickenderfer from Michael Baker. Yeah.
Are those your boards in the back?
I'm going to stand over here so I don't block too much of everyone's view. Could you please state your name and position for the members of the Planning Commission?
Yes, my name is Blickenderfer. I'm the project manager from Michael Baker, who's the civil engineering consulting firm on the projects. Our role is basically the civil land development and environmental permitting.
And we understand that there were questions regarding setbacks, and we've seen it in a comment letter. Specifically, the township zoning ordinance requires that requires setbacks from the property lines and streets at 1.5 times the drill rig height. Will both of these projects comply with that setback requirement?
They will. The total setback, including the 1.5 times the rig height, will be about 260 feet, which falls well within the pad area from the location of the wellheads.
And the ordinance also imposes a 650-foot setback requirement from all pre-existing buildings. Are there any pre-existing buildings within 600 feet of either well?
There are. So if you're looking at the drawings there, we've got the Leto pad on the left easel. And within 650 feet of Leto, there's a clean streams water treatment plant, inhabited and not operational at this point. On the right is the Dionysus pad. There's two buildings within the 650-foot setback of that development. One is Sped Inc. It's a garage warehouse to the southeast of the project, and then the other is Safety Properties, which is a commercial business to the southwest.
And I know that this is a topic that you'll be speaking with your solicitor about, but Olympus has asked for an exemption to the setback requirements for these well pads. And we'd ask that you grant that exemption moving forward. But one of the requirements is that a well operator cannot develop in a way that meets the setback requirement. So is it feasible to move the operations for the well pad to site within the 650-foot setback from the buildings?
No, it is not.
And has Olympus obtained waivers from all of the impacted landowners?
And they have.
The next topic I'd like to discuss is landscaping and screening. And another item that Olympus is asking relief from is with respect to the zoning ordinance requirement to plant pine trees around the wellhead itself. There's no standalone fence around the wellhead, correct?
No, there isn't. No, I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit later here. With regard to pine trees, it's impractical to plant trees around the wellhead itself. So we are not showing those currently on the plan because it ends up being a safety and a security issue.
So planting pine trees around the wellhead itself would impact Olympus's ability for emergency response and
That's
maintenance,
correct.
And we also understand that there are zoning requirements regarding landscaping and screening, specifically with respect to visibility. And we talked about this during the last meeting, but can you explain whether these well pads are visible as they stand today?
They are not. And so what you'll see in our applications is we went to a number of different locations along public roadways and buildings and residencies and took pictures of the sight line to the proposed pad location. And we also looked at the topography included in your application, and the sight line drawings to show what the individual would see from each of those locations. And from that, you'll see that between the existing vegetation and the topography, neither of these pads will be visible to the public.
And I know that there have been questions about visibility from higher elevations. Can you explain how this project, whether there's anything that can be done for pad visibility from the higher elevations?
Operationally, it just becomes very difficult. There just comes a point where, depending on the elevation, there's just no way to provide an adequate screen so we're able to have the operations not be affected.
So as the plan stands, once this well pad is built, it should not be, the existing screening, the natural screening that exists on the property should be sufficient to screen from the public.
That's correct.
That's all I have for you. Thank you. And next, we have a number of operational topics that I know that we'd like to address today. So we have Anthony Miller from Olympus. Do you need any of these drawings at all?
I don't think so.
Okay. Could you please state your name and your title for the members of Planning Commission, please?
Anthony Miller, I'm the drilling manager over all the drilling operations for Olympus. And I do have a pretty soft voice, so if I start getting lower, please tell me. Otherwise, I gotta yell. So.
One of the things that both the municipality and Olympus is concerned about is site safety. Can you please describe what Olympus does to secure the well pad with respect to security in general and fencing?
Doing the operations, doing the drilling and completion operations, those operations go 24 hours a day. We have 24-hour security, basically a gate guard on the lease road itself. That we check people in and out. We actually scan licenses or make sure people are hazard trained, have the proper identification, that type of thing. So that's doing those very active operations. Once the completions is done and it's going into the production mode, what you'll do is you'll have a significant pipe gate, I guess you'd call it, on the lease roads that can be locked. That'll keep anybody from driving onto the pad. But also right on the location itself, the rectangular part you're seeing, we install a 6-foot chain link fence around it, just for added security for the site pad itself. There's obviously one double-sided gate to get in the access road, and then on each side there is a safety exits that you can only exit from the inside. That way, if there is an emergency or somebody has to egress from the site, they can go through those. Otherwise, the whole thing is fenced off to keep folks out. So we also, once it goes in production, we also have security cameras on site, and that's both visual and that's usually several cameras. And then monitor if we do have an alarm go off, if we have somebody call in that they heard something on the pad or saw something on it, then it's a one call number, goes to our operations manager. He can bring it up on his phone and actually pan around and look at the site and make sure everything is okay. So you have that security also.
I understand that in residential districts, the township does not authorize barbed wire. And so in our materials, you'll see that for safety purposes, we're asking that the township reconsider that, just make sure no one's jumping over these fences.
Typically on that top of that 6-foot chain link fence, we usually have the angle piece with 3 strands of barbed wire. So that's our typical setup.
We understand that there are some questions about flaring. Could you please describe any flaring that may exist on the site, if any?
There's only a few instances that you ever want to flare a well. And the first one is one that's in the back of most folks' minds, like the Pittsburgh Mills Mall. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
The one where you have in the back of your mind, it's 50 to 100, 150 foot tall and sounds like a jet engine. That's well testing. They did those on the early days when you didn't have pipelines to the well pads, and basically you drilled them, you fracked them, and you wanted to see what the production was before you put the money into the pipeline. And that's what that is. People don't do that anymore. We have no intentions of doing that. We don't need to flare it to see what we have, so to speak. So when we say flare, that's what most people talk about. During the drilling operation, we do flare, and it's 100% just for safety. As we're drilling the well, when we're drilling the shallower section, we drill the shallow section on air, and those formations produce a little bit of gas, almost no pressure and just a little bit of gas. So when we drill 90 foot down, a stand down, and we stop all of our air, we make a connection, we kick it back on, the air back on, you circulate up the surface a small amount of gas, and we call that connection gas, perfectly normal. You're talking about a 5-foot flame that'll burn for 20 or 30 seconds and then it goes out. It's just that little bit of gas that the hole gives up while we're making a connection. The other time on the drilling side is when we're actually drilling in the lateral itself down in the Marcellus. You are actually, the gas that's entrained in the rock you are chewing up dissolves into the mud system, and when it comes to the surface we have a gas buster that breaks it back out, and we burn that off because it's safer to burn in a flare than just to vent the atmosphere. So typically you have anywhere, again, a 5 or if you're really drilling fast, maybe a 10-foot lazy flame. That's just that gas that's breaking out of those cuttings we're bringing back to surface. Again, completely normal. I will say that our policy, never had to do it, but our policy is that if we anticipate a flare that's bigger than what I just described, or we see one unexpectedly for whatever reason, typically we'll call, we talk with the township, but typically we'll call non-emergency 911 and just let them know. That way if they get calls from residents saying pad looks like it's on fire, then at least they have a heads up of what we're already doing. So as far as flaring and on the completion side, the only time you would flare is if you screened out a stage, basically you pressured out and it's sanded off on you and you need to flow it back temporarily. You might have a flare there, but I can't remember the last time that happened. Typically you won't have any gas to surface until you're in flow back mode and everything is contained at that time.
Hours of operations. Could you explain the hours of operation for the different stages?
Construction is just daylights only. It just depends on the time of the year, depends on the weather, those factors. Drilling and completions, just by the nature of 24 hours. You really can't stop in the middle of a whole section or in the middle of a stage. Once that completions is done, production is obviously 24 hours, but the activity level goes from a low level at the start of production to even lower the farther you go out in just a matter of months. So the activity level falls off very quickly there. But that's 24 hours, but you're talking a couple of pickups a day. In the early stage, maybe a truck or two a day hauling off the water, but that again falls off very quickly.
We understand that Olympus works with the local school districts when discussing their hours of operations. Has Olympus talked to the school districts here, and can you talk a little bit about how the school districts may impact your operations?
Yep, so we have reached out to them and already kind of touched base with them. We're so far out that that's basically all we're doing right now. But once we do get closer, my operation, you have construction, but my operation is usually the one that, you get a step up in activity level. And typically I'll personally go with some other representatives to see the school superintendent or the bus superintendent. And we make sure we have what the school bus routes are, what time they come by. And obviously it gets complicated because sometimes you got 3 sets of buses coming in the mornings and evenings. But what we've done on our other pads is, we kind of self-impose ourselves on those times where we attempt to keep all the trucks off those times. We put up signage. We'll have signage such as, no Olympus road traffic and here's the school bus hours. Or security, the 24-hour security. If it is within a certain amount of time of one of those school bus times, they shut down and we'll have trucks on the leash road until that time is up and then you kind of release them. So it doesn't do us or anybody any good coexisting with school buses on the road. So
And the school bus stop schedule can change from year to year. So if your operations are prolonged, you do periodically check back in with the school districts, correct?
correct. And actually on the last, the last location we were on, we actually hired, I forget who we had, but had somebody go out and just sit there for a few days and get the average of when everything's coming by. And then you give a buffer to that, right? If they're coming in the same 15 minutes every day, you'll give 15 minutes on either side of that just to be safe. And myself and the folks on the rig and the other managers, typically, and I don't know if your township does it, but we'll actually get signed up on like a county. A lot of times a text message you go out and you got a 2-hour delay or closings and things like that. And we actually get those and we relay them out.
Now on to lighting. What type of lighting is used on the well pads?
For, well, they don't have any for construction, typically, for drilling completions, just all temporary lighting. The equipment we have itself, such as the drilling rig, it'll have spotlighting on it to see, work areas around the mud systems and within the rig itself. On the completion side, around the frac trucks and all that equipment, they have a lot of their own spotlighting that's actually on the equipment itself. Other than that, we use just temporary light plants, and you might have anywhere from 4 to 6 on a pad, and we adjust the height of them. They're aimed in. Typically, they're just for a certain work area. It's not our intention to light up the whole pad like a Christmas tree. We basically just light up the working areas, and always been very responsive. I've had pads where landowner will call me, personally and just say, hey, this light's kind of shining up toward me, and I get on the phone and guys walk around to figure out which one it is and make sure everything's pointed down, and it doesn't do us any good to light outside the pad.
So you do take the neighboring property owners into consideration with the direction of the light?
Yeah. And the highest light you see is the rig itself, obviously. And all that lighting points into the derrick itself, and that's just for safety. You have to be able to watch the guys go up and down and what the equipment's doing.
Dust. What does Olympus do to control dust at the well pad?
Really, we've never had issues with dust actually on the pad. Everything is gravelled. On the lease road, with a lot of high traffic, obviously when it dries out, you can get dust. We typically do wet it. You can either wet it with fresh water, and there's other DOT approved things you can put on it. But today, I think we've only used fresh water to kind of wet the road a little bit. And other than the lease road, we haven't had really any issues with dust.
And you use certain materials at the entrance of the access road to help prevent dust and mud and debris, correct?
Yep, so it's actually built into the design of the pad. I believe the first 100, 150 feet, it'd be on the drawing, has a little bit bigger stone, and it's designed to knock any mud off that the trucks would be carrying off the pad. And we are very proactive. I'll give kudos to all the trucking outfits and folks. And if we see that we're tracking dirt or mud onto the lease road, we clean it up as fast as we can. During the construction phase, they typically have a broom, a tractor with a broom on it to keep the road clean that way. But we periodically can run street sweepers, and we do anything we can to keep mud off the roads. It's a bad visual, and all. It's a bad visual. It's a nuisance to folks, and can make it slick. So you have to keep it cleaned up.
And you also have an erosion and sedimentation control plan that helps to make sure that none of the material on the site gets off onto the neighboring properties, correct?
Yeah. I will. That's what all these drawings are showing, but yeah. So. There's a lot of E&S controls.
Signage. We've also asked for the municipality to consider allowing us to move forward with your typical signing because it does not comply with the sizing requirements of the municipality or the township. Can you please explain what signage you do have and what it would look like?
The signage, the state, the DEP requires us, and actually I didn't bring my paper up with the specs, but they have a very, very specific signage requirements. It's exactly this wide, exactly this tall, this high letters, this information, and no extra information. And that's required to be right at the entrance of Dillemuth Road. And that's actually where we're required to keep a copy of the permit, emergency response plans, and those plans. We actually have to keep a copy of them there too. So.
In our conditional use application narrative, I believe that's tab 3 of your application binders. There are pictures of what those signs are, and all those dimensions are listed in there in detail. So you can see exactly what those signs would look like as required by DEP. That's all I have for you. Thank you very much.
I do want to say I brought a real cool casing.
If you want to talk about it, you can.
Nah, you can do it afterwards if you got questions, but if you actually want to see what casings we put in the hole and walk through it, I could talk for 2 hours on this, so I won't take up the time.
Tage? Could you please state your name and position for the members of Planning Commission, please?
My name is Tage Rosendahl. I work for Acoustical Control. I'm a regional account manager.
And could you please explain what your role for this project happens to be?
We did the modeling, the impact modeling for the Leto and Dionysus well pads.
And we submitted a sound impact analysis with our initial application. And can you explain the purpose of that sound impact analysis?
Yeah, it's just basically to take a look at, what the impact is going to be on the surrounding area.
And I know that we explained this during the last presentation, but could you explain just generally how you conduct that assessment?
Sure. We take information, spatial information that has elevational data, and we take source data from the noise producing equipment on site, and then we use a 3D digital mapping software, and we input that frequency data, and we extrapolate that over the spatial data, and it provides us maps that show impact.
And based on your analysis, the Western Township ordinance authorizes a limit of 70 decibels during drilling. For either the Leto or Dionysus well pad, did your analysis show that operations during drilling will exceed that?
No.
And then for completions, the ordinance authorizes 75 decibels during completions. Did your study show that these operations are anticipated to be above those levels?
No, they're not.
I just handed the Planning Commission a revised sound impact analysis for the Leto well pad. That is something that you conducted, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And why did you revise the sound impact analysis for Leto?
No, just looking at the site, there are houses that are going to be impacted that are reasonably close to the area. So in an effort to be a good neighbor, Olympus asked me to run some additional models with mitigation included.
So it's because residents are closer to the Leto well pad than they are for Dionysus, correct?
Correct.
And so what did your modeling results show? If you need, I have your.
No, I can. So in general, the closer you are to the noise sources, the more impact you're going to have from a noise barrier, and then it's reduced as far as you go away further. The greatest impacts were around 7 decibel reduction with utilizing 24-foot STC 34 barrier, and that was at the nearest houses. So just kind of to put that in perspective, a 10 decibel drop is perceived by the human ear as being half as loud. So a 7 decibel reduction is pretty significant.
And so what mitigation measures do you propose in this revised sound impact analysis?
We utilized a 24-foot tall STC 34 acoustical barrier on 3 sides.
And those are the sides that are closest to those impacted residents, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And to your knowledge, Olympus is moving forward with your mitigation recommendations.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is new to you tonight, so if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them later on. That's all I have for you.
Okay.
And I know you were here before as well, but could you please state your name and position for the members of planning?
My name is Gary Stahl, I'm the Senior Project Manager at Stahl Shaeffer Engineering.
And could you please remind us what your role is with respect to these projects?
Yeah, we handled the haul route evaluation and the planning.
And can you describe the proposed haul route for each of these well sites?
Yeah, as shown in tab 6, we also have the board up there, if anybody need, I think it's on the other. This is one with the clips.
Yes, it is.
Yes, if anybody in the audience is interested, that's our route. So as I was saying, tab 6 of the Leto well pad application, the haul route begins on State Route 910, that's Gibsonia Road, and continues on the State Route 1022, which is Oak Road. And the access road for the Leto well pad will be off of Oak Road. Dionysus well pad, similar haul route, beginning on State Route 910 and continuing the Middle Road extension, and then the Dionysus well pad then will have an access road off of Middle Road extension.
And were these haul routes designed to minimize impact to the community?
Yes, they avoid all township roads.
And, okay, so you said that these projects will not be utilizing township roads.
Correct.
And who does have jurisdiction of these roads?
Gibsonia Road and Oak Road are under the jurisdiction of PennDOT, while Middle Road extension is under the jurisdiction of Allegheny County.
And does Olympus plan to obtain the necessary approvals from these bodies to use the haul routes?
Yes, for the Leto well pad, which is off of Oak Road, a state highway occupancy permit from PennDOT has been obtained and is available in tab 11 of the packet. And with respect to the Dionysus well pad, which is off of Middle Road extension, an Allegheny County highway occupancy permit will be obtained.
And there were concerns raised about maintenance of the roads.
Right.
What safeguards are in place to maintain these public roads?
Yes, Olympus is going to enter into an access maintenance agreement with PennDOT to ensure that the road is kept up to standards. Regarding the Allegheny County Road, Middle Road extension, they don't require bonding. However, we have been in contact with Allegheny County as a sign of good faith to attempt to execute an access maintenance plan for that road as well.
And I'd like to have Anthony come back to talk a little bit about how you make sure that your contractors are abiding by speed limits and haul routes and things of that nature.
Beat them is what I typically do. So,
I'm not supposed to tell people that.
well, but no, we have a very big emphasis on contractor management, is what we call it. We have a lot of training anybody coming on off site has to do. They have to be approved, they have to have a passing grade. So that's one way that we control having quality vendors and folks that we only approve of. But we also, we police ourselves. If we do get complaints, if we do have somebody let us know that trucks are traveling too fast, we take it very seriously. There's been many instances where I've had somebody give me a call and say they just saw a tractor trailer, blaze by here 40 miles an hour and they need to slow down, that kind of thing. And what I was telling you earlier on the security cameras, when you're on production, you can check out and see who it is there. but also the sign-in, sign-out sheets. All of us can basically bring it up on a phone. I can see who just signed in, call our representative on the rig, and we have a nice talk with folks. And they usually get one warning, and usually that's it. We have had multiple vendors where we've not invited back to our pads before, put them in the doghouse, so to speak. And so we take it very seriously. They are representing us, right? Obviously, bring in a load from I have a hot shot come in from Texas, and the guy comes up, and I can't sit there next to him, but that's where we have to do our business and talking to their supervisor, conveying that message. Any and all loads and people coming in on pad will typically have, well, not typically, they will have one of these rumor routes, the actual correct route onto the pad itself, with blackout times, with school bus times, and with speed limits. So, and if it is in an area, we have been in areas where I'm thinking of one now where it's just naturally high speed, really the residents, but people in pickup trucks too. We have put up our own speed limit signage before. It'd be like, well traffic, 25 miles an hour if it's a 35 mile an hour, and those kinds of things. So those are additional steps we can take if we are in a spot that seems to be an issue.
And I understand that there may be some discussions about jake braking. Do you take that into consideration with your truck contractors?
Yes, we do, and that's usually just how close we are to residencies, forms, things like that. But most of our sites, the instructions is no jake brakes. And after conveying that on each site, I've never had a complaint. After an initial talk with the trucking outfits. But that's common too, to put up signage for no jake brakes, those kinds of things. With these hills, the only time we have had pads before where we've had some grades that's steep enough to where we ask folks to be patient with us if we have a big load coming off. So those are very few and far between. But generally speaking, we haven't had an issue with jake brakes.
Can you talk a little bit about the general truck traffic that you anticipate for each stage of your operations?
Yep. So, starting with construction, construction obviously at the beginning of it, you have, dozers, grader, excavators, those types of equipment, and usually that stuff, because you typically, getting just a couple pieces of equipment maybe at a time as you build the lease road out to get to the pad. And then once you get out there, obviously you can, you bring in some more. So that just kind of trickles in at the beginning. The highest traffic time on a construction is when you actually get everything to grade and you're rocking the site. You have quite a few rock trucks coming on, and that's the busiest time. And the construction folks might have a better answer, but I think typically that'll go for 4 or 5 days or a week maybe, depending on the size of the location, that type of thing. So you have that on the construction side. On the drilling side, my busiest time is when I'm moving on and moving off. When I'm moving on, the rig itself typically is anywhere from 45 to 55 loads on the rig itself. Those are by far the biggest loads that will travel the roads. And all together, a rig move might be 100 trucks, and that's spread out over usually 7 or 8 days. Just that varies, but so that's spread out. But during that time, there's a lot of traffic control. Every permitted load is required to have flaggers, traffic control at intersections that you need, which is typically most of them. As you get closer to the pad. Signage, all those things, and that all stays in place until we're fully basically in, and pilot cars, the whole deal. And it'd be the same thing when we rig the rig down and leave. So everything on when I'm done drilling, everything on the site basically comes with me, the rig and everything. During the drilling operations, it calms way down. The busiest times is as we get closer to the end of each well on the pad, and we're getting ready to run production casing and do that cement job. A few days before we're ready to do that, we'll have probably 8 or 9 tractor trailer loads of casing come on pad. A lot of times that'll be spread over a day or two. For the actual cementing of the production casing, you probably have 6 or 7 trucks and a pickup truck or 2, and they'll typically convoy in, and that's just one time in. They're there for probably 12 or 14 hours on site, and then they're done, they leave. You know, that's the biggest single convoy that will come in and on the cement side, or for the drilling side. For the completion side, similar. They have a similar number of loads coming on site. Right around 100. The difference is very few, if any, are permitted loads. They're all tractor trailer size loads. The actual pump trucks are mounted on tractor trailers, and everything else just comes in by truck. And a lot of that is smaller truck traffic too. So similar thing, they're moving in, over a week and a half, all those loads. And once they start actually completing the well, your highest traffic is sand, depending on how many stages you're doing a day, that kind of thing. That can be anywhere from 50 to 80 sand trucks on a 24-hour period. And they're not front-loaded or back-loaded. They're basically spread throughout that time. Discounting school bus times, those kinds of things. And what we typically do to reduce that load is once the pad's complete, once the drilling rig's gone, before the frac crew even gets there, they typically over the week or 2 prior be bringing in sand and actually stockpile it. You see the big boxes on the tractor trailers that say sand box and arrows up and those brand names. That's what they use in there. That's the sand coming in those boxes, and they get basically a forklift unloads them and can stack them and stockpile them on site. And so that's going that side. Obviously, water questions are going to come up on water. Olympus has every intention, and they're going to talk to even more. Every intention of high rate water coming from Allegheny or a high rate source. A lot of our other sites, we supplement or do the job with municipal water, basically, put a tap in to assist them as close as we can. But when you can get that high rate water, water trucks almost down to nothing. And if you can't, then obviously you have a lot of truck traffic on the water, and that varies greatly depending on the season, how many stages you're trying to do. The size of the job, so that number can vary quite a bit. But
And that high rate means a pipeline, right? It means a water pipe.
yeah. So that's either a hard line, typically it's laid flat. It's a temporary line, but it can be either or. It's whatever makes sense, and the agreements you get with right-of-ways, landowners, those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you. Brian. This is the final member of our team to speak tonight, and then I know that you have public comment and then your questions that we'll get to. Can you please state your name for the Planning Commission?
Yes, my name is Brian Dillemuth. I'm the Regulatory Advisor with Olympus Energy.
And what's your role for the project?
So my role for this project is I handle the overall permitting of the well pad, the wells, and water sourcing.
And one of the questions that we received before the meeting tonight was to explain how Olympus handles complaints. Can you walk through that, please?
Yeah, there's multiple ways we handle complaints. On our signage, the front of the access road, we do have our 24-hour hotline. That's a manned hotline. So a call goes in there, someone will respond. We also have our website, olympusenergy.com. There's a form to fill out there. That is checked every day, and any questions, comments, concerns that come into that, which usually handled within 1 to 2 days. So those are the ways we handle complaints.
And Anthony mentioned it, but can you explain Olympus's plan for water?
Yeah, so water, whenever we go into a new area, we start doing an analysis of what our water supplies, rates, volumes are available. In this area, we have just started that process. We've talked to some other operators that have some withdrawals on the Allegheny River. We will have discussions with any water purveyors to see what infrastructure they have in place or any planned expansions or things like that. And then it's just, it's economics too. It's how much those sources cost, how many wells we're gonna do, and where the cost benefit is, whether we pipe or truck.
And one of the reasons you can't really do that complete evaluation right now is because you don't know if you have an approval yet, correct?
That is correct.
As part of your drilling permit for PADEP, you have to conduct water quality testing. Can you explain your obligation and the testing that you complete?
Yes, as part of the well drilling permit, we're required to do a water survey out to 2,500 feet from the wellhead itself. The funny thing is the DEP requires notifications of those same drilling permits out to 3,000 feet. So instead of people calling why we're not getting tested, we've self-imposed to go out to 3,100 feet to do our water surveys. And basically, we hire a third-party contractor that's not affiliated with, is not an employee of the lab or affiliated with Olympus, and they will contact everybody that falls within that radius. They'll conduct a survey, so basically all your domestic water supplies, even if it's to water your cows, whatnot, we'll get out there, we'll sample all of those. Those will all be analyzed, and then we're required, once we get those back from the lab, to get them back to the landowners within 10 days, and then we're required to provide those to the Pennsylvania DEP at a minimum of 10 days prior to any drilling operations.
And do you disclose the results of those water tests to anyone but the landowners?
No, we do not.
And one of those reasons, I know that we've had a couple of questions and discussions with the township. Why? Why would anyone care if their water tests are disclosed? Well, think if you're selling your house and you find out that your water isn't great. That makes it more difficult to sell your house. So there are some reasons why, practical reasons why people don't want to disclose that information.
It's also just private information. DEP is not allowed to release that either. And a lot of people have never had their water tested, so the first time they see what their quality of their water is typically when we provide those with that analysis.
And we've discussed in our materials, and we've talked with your solicitor, it's Olympus's position that any water quality testing requirements or disclosure of those results that's beyond what PADEP requires is preempted, and we're happy to continue those discussions with your solicitor. Could you describe how Olympus disposes of waste from the well site?
Yes, so obviously there's different types of waste on the site. We do have a waste management plan. We have contracts with landfills, and typically all that's handled accordingly through the proper chains. Solid waste goes to the landfill. It has to be analyzed. You have to get approvals from DEP before you take it to that landfill. And then as far as liquid waste, typically our production water and stuff, we enter into water sharing agreements with other operators. So most of the time our water is actually recycled and reutilized for completion operations with other operators. If that isn't an option, then we would look to take it typically to either a water recycling facility like an RES, or we'll take it over to Ohio for deep well injection.
And Olympus has provided its full waste management plan with its conditional use application. It's tab 10 of the Leto conditional use application and tab 9 of the Dionysus application, if you're looking for more detail on that. And anything else? I think this concludes our presentation, and we're happy to open it up to the rest of the meeting.
Scott, do you have any review?
I do, and for the sake of time, I'll review both the Dionysus and the Leto well pad information at the same time. To a large degree, they overlap. First comment I had was that use of a deep well site is a conditional use in the R2 zoning district. In the case of Leto and the I zoning district, the applicant has acknowledged that as filed for application for conditional use. The Township Board of Supervisors will need to hold a conditional use hearing, take testimony regarding both of these sites. I believe currently with the extensions granted by the applicant, that conditional use will need to be held by at some point in May, I believe. I'm sorry, that hearing will be held in May sometime. Second item was just touched upon, and that was that the applicant indicates that the source of water supply is not known at this time. The documents indicate the water may be piped from a water authority or other water source or trucked into the site. And I understand, based on testimony tonight, that you won't have a decision, it sounds like, until you have some type of approval. Is let's put it this way, any information I think that you can offer to the Planning Commission Board of Supervisors regarding that matter, I think will be helpful. The next item is just a statement of fact that a highway occupancy permit is going to be needed from Allegheny County for the site driveway off of Middle Road Extension, and that's for the Dionysus well. Next item was touched upon in the presentation, and that is that the zoning ordinance requires generally that deep well pipe pads be situated at least 650 feet away from pre-existing buildings. They outlined in both cases what those buildings were. And they also indicated in their application documents that they're requiring an exemption from those setbacks for varying reasons. Next item, the ordinance requires that a preparedness prevention contingency plan be provided to all emergency responders. That PPC plan, if you will, has been prepared and provided. It does need to be provided and consulted with the emergency responders. Next item, the applicant has just addressed the issue regarding testing of water wells, developed springs, and surface waters. The zoning ordinance currently requires that those sources of water within 1,000 feet of the well site be tested for their existing quality. Testimony tonight was that, if I understand correctly, that there will be testing by Olympus out to a 3,100 foot radius. The zoning ordinance does request that testing be performed for a number of parameters listed in the ordinance as bacteria/coliform, salt, brine, sulfur, hydrocarbons, including halogenated hydrocarbons, heavy metals. I would ask that the applicant identify which of those parameters that they are not proposing to test for. And I guess just a confirmation, does that 3,100 feet also extend not only to wells but to develop springs and surface waters?
It's landowner specific. Obviously, we ask the landowners what sources they have, and we will test those sources.
Okay.
Because you don't know. Unless you're on the property, you don't know that.
Correct.
So, just food for thought, if you're willing to self-impose a 3,100 foot radius, if the zoning ordinance only requires a 1,000 foot radius, is there still the need for preemption to that zoning ordinance section? If, in essence, you're exceeding what the ordinance requires anyway? Just,
The ordinance requires us to give you the results.
okay. The conflict that you currently have with that ordinance provision is that providing the sample results to the township.
It's also being subject to potentially inconsistent regulation from township to township in an area where it's clearly covered by state law. So state law is intended to occupy it.
Okay.
In addition, I don't know what authority the township would have to enforce the water testing. That's under the purview of DEP as well.
Well, I mean, to be clear, I don't think that there's a criteria that has to meet a certain standard. The township's looking for disclosure of the information, not that some action be taken as to whether or not it tests in a certain manner. So I guess I would argue that it's not preemptive, that it's nothing explicitly under the Oil and Gas Act or DEP regulations that would say that this information can't be shared. Now, if the township would turn down the application based on a finding or results of those testing, I think you'd certainly be within your rights to say that's outside the scope. But the disclosure of the information to the township, I'm not so sure, but I guess we can continue that
Yeah,
conversation.
that's where the privacy implications come into play.
Okay, I'm not sure there's a privacy right to your water testing results, but we can talk about it.
Next item that deals with perimeter fencing, which identifies their current proposal. Other than perhaps this barbed wire issue, the only other conflict that I noted was that the embedding of the posts, the posts in concrete, the ordinance requires, and how that might conflict with operations and to conflict with day-to-day operational and safety requirements of the applicant at their well sites. Zoning ordinance, likewise in that same section, does require pine trees to be planted and screened around the fence area. I believe the terminology that the ordinance uses is wellhead fencing or something to that. And it sounds like you're taking that interpretation to mean the wellhead itself. In my opinion, and I'm not the zoning officer, but wellhead's not defined. I think the intent was planting of pine trees around the well pad fencing rather than a well head, because the ordinance doesn't really require any fencing around the well head. So I mean, that's
as the zoning officer, that is my interpretation of it as well. Not specifically around the actual wellhead itself, but fencing around that.
Now, as to whether or not the pine trees are warranted, I mean, in my mind, that's a completely different discussion and one maybe that should be had. Next section dealt with noise. You have provided noise assessments that indicate compliance with the zoning conditional use requirements. The new noise assessment indicated an STC 34, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Barrier. I'm no noise expert, I'm sure.
STC is a measure of how much noise is blocked by a particular medium.
So it could be various different types of media. Is that I mean, what is the wall made of, I guess?
It's called mass loaded vinyl. It's very, very dense, heavy material. So basically you need to provide greater density to block more noise. And so the heavier the material, the more noise can be blocked. This is 2.5 pounds per square foot, so it's very, very heavy material.
It might not hurt in the assessment just to provide a sentence or two just describing what that is. And then you indicated that barrier would be on 3 sides, and if you look closely at the colored graphic, I think I can kind of see where those 3 sides are, but I think it would be helpful if that could get translated somehow to the civil drawings, and you could just show where that, is it inside the fence, outside the fence, and which 3 sides it is. I also point out that there is a methodology to deal with complaints about noise, which is fairly specific in the ordinance, and I just bring that to your attention. Next comment is just that you express in your documents a willingness to negotiate a developer's agreement, which may come to discussion further in the process. And the next comment dealt with the outside permits that were required for the project. some of which you've provided already, some of which are in the works, and just an indication that you would need to provide those prior to, development of the well pads. Two other items that were not in the letters. I guess one is particular to Middle Road Extension, as to whether there's been any evaluation as to the horizontal vertical geometry of that road in getting the various truck components to the site. I assume you evaluated that to some extent, but particularly, I guess, the tractor trailers and the whatever's bringing the drill rig in. Obviously, Oak and Gibsonia Road are less challenged. The one, I guess, additional question following up on that with the route plan was, and maybe it's in the documents, I don't recall, but tonight it was indicated that it would be various roads to Route 910 Gibsonia Road. Which direction on Gibsonia Road does the traffic go from that point? Do we know?
It just kind of depends on where each of the operations is coming from or the vendor is coming from. But we'll have everything laid out per vendor, but just kind of depends if you're coming from one side or the other.
So they, currently as it stands today, they could come from either side of it?
Yeah.
Okay. Last comment, which again is not indicated on here, is that the township does have a grading ordinance, and you will need to obtain a grading permit prior to earth-moving activity. So, those are the extent of my comments.
Thank you, Scott. Here we're at public comment. I would ask you to step to the mic and provide your name and address. Speak away.
Good evening. My name is Joe Ressinetti. I live at 1006 York Way, Gibsonia, PA. That's 1.25 miles from the proposed Leto well pad site. I have a couple of concerns I just wanted to bring to your attention. There's been a lot of conversation about noise and traffic addressed tonight, but I'd like to make sure that the Planning Commission also addresses air and water pollution as well as contamination from radiation. And I wondered if the township would consider conditioning approval on maintaining limits on the storage of radioactive materials at the site. Page 3 of the application that was provided to me, it's checked that there will be air pollutants, water pollutants, noise, radioactive emissions, and also that there will be radioactive materials varying in nature stored on site at variety different times during drilling and construction. And my one question that I had to you, does the commission have information that was not on this application that could be provided to me as a community member? Should I just snap photos of the boards before I go out, or?
Those are all in the application.
Should be a set of plans available.
I didn't get the tabs. I only have the.
We can get you copies of all.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that, if the applicants, okay, some of that stuff, if there's studies and things like that are often copyrighted, and we have to give you permission to reproduce this, so is that something the applicant's comfortable with? If it's in the application, is it okay for us to reproduce?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank
I
you.
think alternatively, there's a set available for inspection here at the township.
Okay.
That you could come up and I'm sure they could provide you space in this room here to open it up on a table.
Right.
Okay, great. I did notice on one of the drawings that there was one of those rectangular open air frac pond disposal sites that
No.
might be.
Stormwater. It's all
Okay.
stormwater control.
All right.
Anybody else? Oh, sorry.
My name is David Harrison. I live at 1339 Middle Road Extension. I just have some questions about the rumor about some improvements to Middle Road Extension. I don't know if they're aware of how bad it is to travel up and down Middle Road Extension. And as far as hauling, is there any discussion about straightening out the Middle Road Extension?
We haven't got that far yet.
Okay.
Yes.
Cause I mean, if you drive that road, you can have a hard time bringing up a big drill rig or anything like that. It's extremely difficult to get around, so.
Very narrow.
Do you know who would do your site development? Would it, you do it yourself, or do you contract that out?
We contract that out.
Do you know who generally does?
We bid that out to approved contractors that we have on our bid list.
I would ask if you're gonna ask questions, and there's no
Okay.
objection to that, but focus this way.
Okay.
And then we'll let him respond.
Okay.
We don't wanna get into a sidebar.
No problem. And as far as like, when they get into production, are they gonna, is there pipelines that are accessible to the wells?
Yes, there will be pipelines.
They're not there yet?
They're not there yet, no.
And as far as the horizontal drilling and stuff, do you know how many legs you would have coming out from the main well?
I believe on the conditional use, I think the Dionysus is originally, we put in for, possibly 10 Marcellus wells, and on the Leto, 5.
Okay. Have all the property owners that would be influenced by that be notified, or is that all pending if you get approval?
Yes, and if we have lease agreements, and obviously even, we probably have a fair amount of those, but we would continue getting any, needed lease agreements prior to doing any drilling.
I can answer that a little bit more. As part of the public hearing process, which we're still in the planning commission process, the next stage is public hearing in front of the board of supervisors. We are required by the MPC to mail out notices to all affected, parcels.
So that hasn't happened?
That has not happened yet because we don't know, we don't have a date set for the public hearing yet. This is just us getting together and trying to figure out what direction we need to take and kind of an information gathering. So you will get notice if you are in that designated area.
And just general, what would be the estimated depth to the Marcellus Shale and the one up Middle Road Extension?
I don't have the information right in front of me, but it would be probably somewhere in the 7,000 to 7,500 feet. TVD, which is true vertical feet, so it'd be straight down, around 7,500, so.
And the estimated horizontal length or extent, how far would you go out from the main wellhead?
That isn't written in stone yet. That depends on getting approval, leasing requirements, those kinds of things. But I will say our average well length is probably in the 7,000 to 14,000 foot range. So, as far as the lateral.
And as far as the sound study, the 70 decibel dBA, 75, do you know what location that was recorded at? Or what, how did that go out?
I don't believe it was recorded. I think it was part of the study. Would you address that?
Yeah, it's based on your ordinance levels.
I mean, is that measured theoretically at the boundary, or
Yeah.
so many feet from the well, or what's the standard?
Yeah, so when the standard is based on your ordinance, so your baseline ambient is 65 decibels.
At what location?
Anyway.
Where did you model it to?
Yeah, from the wellheads, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, from the wellheads to the property line.
Yes, yeah.
How many receivers? So you modeled
There was
2
30, I
receivers,
thought.
right? You
Yeah,
modeled-
there was 31 receivers that we actually calculated the decibel levels at. I think it was 31 or 32. And then, but I mean, the impact model goes beyond that. It's just those are the houses nearby, so we pin those. And it depends on the ordinance. Sometimes we'll pin the property line, sometimes we'll pin, the houses, to denote what the impact is on those specific locations.
Your question about where the modeling is always emitted from, on the drilling rig, I'll provide Tage with a schematic where I think my equipment's going to be, as far as shakers and air compressors and some of those noisier items, and he uses that to help tune the model. That way he knows it's up close to the side location, close to the sound wall, or it's over on the other side, on the open side. So we do provide him with that information, and the same on a frac spread. So,
I guess my only real concern is the traffic, getting up Middle Road Extension. Not just for us driving up and down it, but for their own they're operational, it's gonna be difficult for them to get equipment up that road.
Our concerns is I have a list of questions.
It isn't a critical thing, it's just, do they realize how hard it'll be to bring stuff up there?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we'll open up our section of comments from the planning, comments and questions from the planning commission. I have a couple to start off here. And if the developer provided documentation of their right to go on this property?
We include the leases. Aren't the leases in our application? If we did not, I don't recall if we provided copies of the leases with the application, but if not, we can.
I mean, housekeeping, yeah, you know, typically we ask for deeds and things like that, so what's your interest in the property? Sure. We're gonna talk, traffic, and I think that's one of the bigger things that we're gonna talk about. We have, several intersections of, in addition to the state of Middle Road Extension, which is in poor shape. We have concerns with regards to specific intersections where we have, less than stellar, situations right now, levels of service, I guess you would call it. You know, we've done traffic studies on them, and they're borderline getting close to requiring action at those intersections. And we feel that with the kind of traffic that the wells will generate, some of them will be on your traffic route, some of them are, well, they're all on your traffic route. But basically, the ones that we're talking about would be Oak Road and Route 910. Oak Road and Bairdford Road. I don't know if that's on your road or not, but you know, I anticipate that there will be some traffic coming that way. That's a really screwy intersection. Route 910 and Middle Road Extension. And Middle Road and Route 910. Middle Road and Route 910 may have already crossed the line and require a traffic light at that sign, at that location. It's pretty close. So we, you know, our concern is that we're going to be creating situations here that will impact us. The other thing is, you'd indicated in response to Scott's question what direction your traffic would be coming from. I'd make note to you that there is a hazardous material prohibition from Saxonburg Boulevard towards the well. I think basically because of the curves down the road to the turnpike at that point. I'm going to get a hazardous loads prohibited there. Does anybody else have anything? I have some more here, but I need some time.
I'm checking mine off.
One comment that was made was that, you know, what would happen in a prolonged operation? And I just wondered what would prolong the operation and how long may it be prolonged? Whether it's drilling.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Anthony can speak to the drilling stuff, but, we haven't had any issues to date, but, you know, if machinery goes down or things like that, maybe if you want to talk on the drilling side, potential stuff that you've seen.
As far as delays, probably the biggest delays is one, could be on the construction side, just depending on the weather. Obviously, if you got a wet summer or anything like that, you just, you know, it can, and when I say extends it, you know, no activity happens for periods of time, you know, while it's dry. On the completion side, there's typically very few delays on that side. You know, no more than a few days here or there if they screen out a stage or something like that, and we can talk on that afterwards if you have a question on that. If there's any major extensions, typically it's might be on the drilling side. While I'm drilling the well, if we encounter something in the formation, or if I get my bit stuck in the well, I would have to basically try to fish it out, and I might have to sidetrack the lateral and do other things like that. Sometimes I've seen that stuff extend out, a couple of weeks sometimes. Those are very rare, they're very costly, and that's my entire job, really, to make sure that doesn't happen. And so that's really the biggest thing. So as far as extending out the thing from construction to production, if you have gaps, within, you drill and then you don't complete it maybe for a month or 2 months or several months, that would extend, from the start of the project to the end. But as far as within each timeline, those are the main ones.
Another thing that was mentioned was spotlights on the tower, and I think you indicated that if a neighbor objects to something shining on them, you can adjust those. But can they be shielded, or are you just adjusting direction, or is there some kind of shielding you can provide on this?
The lighting in the tower, the derrick, is smaller lighting, and it's all pointed inward anyway. There is no way of covering the outside of the derrick all the way to the top, because you have to have visual just for safety. But besides that lighting, when I said spotlighting, it's not actual spotlights. It's just small lighting just in a small area. Typically, if we ever do have complaints, it's a light plant. They got turned the wrong way, or happens to have one light that's kind of, turned outward a little bit. Sometimes it causes a glare, and that's when we will, turn them in, turn them down. We've even lowered them, and so we go through those lengths of actually keeping them pointed in. So.
And what kind of lights would they be?
Just your typical light plant that you'd see on any kind of construction site. So, and if it's in an area, if it's really an issue or really close to somebody, then you can get balloon lighting and some other things like that are typically less effective for us, but cause a little bit less glare. But if you lower them down, point them in, you really don't have an issue.
Okay. What are the, do you have any kind of timing for drilling operations, or any kind of schedule estimated or otherwise?
I wish I could tell you. I think originally when we set this was construction maybe at 2021. I think since that point in time it has got pushed back, but we do have lease obligations, so we will have to get there. But with the commodity prices the way they are, I'm sure you're well aware, a lot of operators are kind of slowing down until prices are more favorable to, continue operations.
Would you be able to provide MSDS sheets to the emergency responders for the materials you have on the site?
I can check into that. I know we keep all that all those on site, both in a couple different places, and trailers, company man, but I can look into that for you.
Another thing is, I haven't talked this ever with the planning commission, but would it be possible to maybe view each site at some point?
Yeah, typically what we've done in other communities is once the well pad has been constructed, we'll bring emergency
I was
response.
kind of thinking now.
Oh, you want to see one of our existing sites? Yeah, we get something set up for that.
Done any of them.
These properties are these existing sites.
No, I mean, these properties.
Oh, you want to see these properties?
Yeah, I want to see where the well pad is and see what's around.
Let me talk with our land folks and make sure the landowners and everything are agreeable to it, but it shouldn't be a problem.
That's all I have right now.
I will say one thing on the back to the traffic side of thing. I do want to note that, our operations, though they can be a little heavy at times, they are temporary. This isn't going to be continued operation for 5-10 years. We're going to go in there, develop these wells, and then very minimal to no excess traffic after that point. So I just want to make note of that.
Okay. Other members? Questions?
I have a couple questions or comments. Just initially, we've had other developments. We had the number 2 Ruston mine. It was, in the process of being reclaimed and everything like that. So the residents are very conscious about road mud. So I know that there's been some other developments whenever Concordia built an independent living facility that was on Cedar Ridge Road. They were actually open to paving the first 150 feet to reduce that mud. Is that something that you guys would be favorable to, or at least open to paving a section of that?
Yeah, so PennDOT has a strike-off letter that they've added to their 408 requirements that requires all Marcellus well pads, driveways to be paved for the first, I think it's 50 or 100 feet, don't quote me on that. But that design is included in the plans and is part of the HOP applications that have been submitted for approval.
Okay. And I know I've seen in the past on some of the other, and I've talked to some other communities, and I know we briefly mentioned it before with like cattle guards and stuff like that. Is that something that you'd be open to providing to knock off some of that excess mud before it hits that pavement?
We're basically required by DEP with certain procedures we have to do. These permits have been approved. We've never used cattle guards anywhere, something that's typically not done on these well site access roads. In lieu of that is the bigger aggregate. And like I said, a lot of that stuff is taken out once the site has been constructed, and all of the vehicles that would track mud, the rock's been laid in that, all that's removed is finer, and it's upkept through the time. So there's really not a need after construction.
Okay, what is your assurance if there is road mud that it will be cleaned in a quick and effective manner?
Yeah, so obviously we have our complaint line, but I hope it never gets to that. But DEP thoroughly regulates us. That's probably why a lot of these other developments didn't get, weren't in a hurry to clean up their roads. We will get notice of violations and fines for that. So it's in our best interest to make sure that it's clean all the time.
I am also aware of that. I'm also aware that Allegheny County Air Quality also will be a regulating authority for you.
Yes.
But as I said, they're also a regulating authority to the mine in Russellton number 2, which has still gotten road mud on and everything like that. We have had them come into agreement with us, and they're a little bit better on it now. They have paved a large section of that, and they've altered their truck wash, so they actually do go a little bit step farther than what you're proposing, but I understand that it's a different type of atmosphere whenever it's completed. So I would just like to ask you to think a lot about that, because there are going to be a lot of very concerned residents. I've taken a lot of complaints about road mud. So as a going forward, to just kind of make that on top of your radar, because there are going to be, and there is dust control issues and everything like that, that we have heard about that. So they're going to be a lot more sensitive, and they're going to be a lot more in tune to watching for dust on buildings, dust and that come from the road. Trucks that come in, they don't have to be dirty from, because do you do your, it's not your own trucks,
They're vendor
contractors.
Yep.
We've ran into problems where the actual vendors have been using dirty trucks, and they've been coming from other sites and dragging debris and stuff in, and it loosens whenever you go on that construction road and everything. And then when they exit again. So I would just ask you to be very mindful whenever you're considering that and going forward in the process for the mud on the roads. I had another concern about the school, not really concerned, but just to make you aware, especially on the Leto pad for the school bus curfew. We also have community days. So I would encourage you to reach out to the township and the police And it's only usually a 2-day event, to take that in mind whenever you are, because it is at that Fairford Park.
Typically, when is that?
I think, yeah, it's usually in,
First weekend of August.
July, August,
It's the first weekend in August.
first weekend in August.
This year it's gonna be a little bit different, but typically it's the first
Okay.
Friday and Saturday in August.
Okay, that's good to know, thank you.
But, so,
Just to echo Bill's concern, there's a well pad over on Route 908, I think it's in Long Township. They had an issue with mud on the road. Once it's on the road, there's really nothing you can do, it's bad at that point. You know, I've seen the street sweepers go by and they basically just smear the mud. They get the big chunks, but they don't get the dust.
So we're well aware, and like I said, we're always after it, because like I said.
I suspect somebody going on because I went by the other day and now there's a fresh new layer of stone on the access road.
Yeah. Okay.
That's not your side.
No.
Quickly, a couple other things I have. Is there a plan to deal with, you know, emergencies such as fire? You know, what happens if fracking the well breaks out? Excessive traffic accidents, coordination with local authorities.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of plan in place for that?
Yeah, I think that was all submitted, was ERP and PPC plan, so everything's site specific. We meet with first responders, we go through all that. It's specific to that well pad and, you know, all of the local emergency response. So all of that is detailed out, and it should have been, I believe it wasn't included in the packages.
And you meet with first responders and post tours and training on site?
Yep. And we actually just, so every year we do a incident drill internally. And this is basically, we don't know anything about it. Our upper management throws it on us, and this one was in Penn Township. So then we had to, we follow the ICS command structure. So it's like a 2-day deal. We actually went to Penn Township, used their building, their first responders, everybody was involved in it, and it goes over really well.
If you're looking for that plan, it's tab 7 of the conditional use application, so it has all the information.
The gentleman's question before was concerned with regards to Middle Road Extension. Have you been on that road?
We have, and we'll continue to look at that. Like I said, we did just get talked to the county, and I believe we're gonna try to meet with them, so.
I mean, under the scenario there, I can't even imagine a line of trucks with somebody trying to get out and go grocery shops. I don't even know how they get around.
We'll continue to look at that.
I think we'll have to look at it very closely.
Okay.
Is that something you can update us on in the future?
Yes.
When do you anticipate that?
Yeah, we'll call them, get follow-up tomorrow, and try to get a meeting on the books.
One other thing that we've had problems with in the past concerns traffic and backup alarms. Do you typically look at, I know you can't shut them off, but do you typically look at arranging your sites so backups are minimal?
Yeah, also a lot of times, like, especially, both on our drilling completion sides, we usually have a route of ingress and egress, so to minimize backing up. So a lot of those trucks come through, drop off their loads and leave, so yeah, minimize that.
Do you have any idea of off-site support areas that you'll be utilizing? Staging areas, tanks, things like that?
I mean, at this point in time, we have nothing planned. If something would be planned, then we can bring it up to you guys.
Possible they might involve township routes at that point?
I mean, if they had to, yeah, I mean, it is possible, but like I said, we haven't had to do much of that, at this point in time with any of our other pads, so.
I guess some of the problems I'm having here seem to be, we're not that close yet. We're being asked to prove things that we don't know the answers to.
I mean, we provide a lot of stuff, and like I said, I know there's some traffic questions, once again, and we will look at that, and that's something we have to work out with the county. We have a list of kind of some add-on stuff as we go through here, so each time I think we've gotten a few other comments, so we'll get that
We
information.
don't know what we're doing with water, we don't know what we're doing with routing.
Right.
We don't know.
Well, the routing we have provided, as far as the water stuff, that's.
You provided routing for basically your normal routes.
Right.
But I just asked about staging and things like that.
Like I said, I don't have any plans for staging at this point in time, so we wanted to look at that.
Yeah.
And as far as the water, that's kind of normal operating procedures when we go through this stuff, because we're ahead of time. That usually falls into place down the road. I mean, from our standpoint too, if we're.
That's a huge impact to the township.
Potentially, yes. But as we're going through, there's a lot of, say I find a source that we're working on getting, we don't have it finalized, we don't have pipeline routes, there's lease agreements. If I were to, throw that out there, then it becomes public knowledge, it could be issued for me to get from point A to point B. So obviously, as we mentioned, it's our best interest typically with the number of wells, when we get to a greater number of wells at sites, to try to find a faster withdrawal. So I will talk to the local water purveyors, just see what they have available, and but we always plan for the worst trucking. We haven't had to really truck many wells at all to this point, but that's why when we give these discussions, we say, hey, this is kind of worst case, best case scenario.
And further away from the river, so that's my concern.
I understand that.
I'll add, one of the issues that we found from what we started, we all know we operate in a very suburban area, and we have found that a lot of the processes going through the townships and going through this stuff, some of them have, went quadruple what we thought they would, right? So we've almost had to get way out in front, way before you could even start talking on the water, before you could start even selecting pipeline routes and things like that. Or sometimes before you even have all the leasing together yet, because all of that costs a huge amount of money, takes so much time. So it's a balancing act of trying to work through the process, feel good about the process that something's not going to show up 3 months from now that, hey, we can't do anything. And we're left with all this other stuff. So it's a very much a balancing act. It's not really easy on either side. And so that's mine.
I know with it being early planning, we like to already establish this, but with the interest in staging, it would definitely help monitor and control truck traffic, especially with curfews. I know truck drivers sometimes don't pay attention to curfews and speed limits, and it would help regulate that just from the beginning, safety and everything else.
Other comments?
I have a couple of questions. I'm asking if, with regard to these road routes for trucking, is it your intention to conduct site-specific studies to propose routes for trucking for adequacy and safety? And if you do that, will you share those results with us and provide us with a list of road improvements for the roads you plan to use for transportation for water, however you transport it, and sand or all other materials? And I would put a point on this with something I saw actually by accident from the University of Wisconsin, from the Transportation Information Center. This is a quote. It's going to give us some context of what this gentleman back here was talking about. It's a quote: "A legally loaded semi-truck can produce 5,000 to 10,000 times the road damage of one car." Okay, so when we look at the roads we have here, the condition they're in, particularly the Middle Road extension, I am very interested in knowing upfront and in detail what your plans might be for turning that really pathway into a transportation route that can handle the kind of transport that you intend to use it for. What is the magnitude? We'd like to know that. I would like to know that up front, not after the fact. So that's something I'd be looking for. That's something you're gonna provide us with?
We'll look into it, yeah.
Can you provide us with?
Yeah, if we pull that information, we will share.
You'll give us that information. Thank you.
But I don't know that that can be, I don't know when, we don't know, we can't control the timing of when things are decided in Allegheny County.
Right.
You know, our task here is to satisfy the requirements of the ordinance, and we feel that our submissions have done that, so it's just, you know, we're very obviously cognizant of your concern, but we have to deal with other bodies who have jurisdiction over those roads, and we can't necessarily control the timing on when those discussions are gonna be completed.
Well, I would say that information is crucial to my decision making anyways. When you did your sound modeling, and I haven't looked at what you gave us yet. Were those decibel levels for activity at a single wellhead or combined, and how will that work?
So it's not the wellhead, it's all the equipment around it. So for each drilling component, there are multiple pieces of equipment that we have sound signatures for. And that's important because it's not just a decibel level, it's the frequency bands, so that you're capturing all this, because they all operate a little bit differently. So each one of those pieces of equipment has a sound signature. It's kind of like a fingerprint. So we plug that in, you know, and then, you know, however many of those there are, and then based on the locations that Olympus gives me for that equipment, we try to, you know, get those kind of placed where they're going to be on the well site, and then that's how, you know, those maps are produced. And then with completions, you know, you have frac trucks and wireline trucks and pump down trucks and blenders and a lot of other equipment, but it's the same process.
So these nomograms that you provided us, are they reflective of the totality of the sound from all of this?
Yeah, just the noise being produced by the equipment that we've included.
All at the same time?
Yes. It doesn't include anything that might be happening outside, you know, traffic, guy hunting, something like that.
I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, sounds that your equipment.
Yes.
And they're combined in this, and that becomes the suite of noise for which you quantitate and estimate quantitatively.
Correct.
Now, what is the most noise that comes? Is it from the surface equipment or the actual fracking process? And that's a question I don't want to answer.
So I mean, it's the equipment on the surface that is making the noise. You know, it's so during frac, it's pump trucks. So it's large diesel engines that you know that run in concert that produce the noise.
Okay, and that's what you model.
Sure. And I mean it's similar with, you know, any, you know, kind of noise. You know, if you're industrial, architectural, you're looking at whatever those noise sources are, and you know, typically, you know, it's a large engine of sorts that's you know, one of the culprits.
So again, this suite of equipment that generates this noise, is that for work on a single well or for all of the activities that might be happening simultaneously?
Well, I mean, they're only working on one well at a time.
Okay.
Now, that's not saying that it doesn't happen where they do multiple wells at a time, but I've never been on I've been on one well pad in Appalachia where it was happening. I've been on them in North Dakota where they had multiple rigs or multiple frac spreads.
And I think maybe my final question, I'm not sure, it's the one I've raised last time around, is what are you going to do do, you're talking about a 25-foot sound barrier, which I've been reading about. What are you gonna do about for the people at higher elevations? We have residents, some of them were here at your last meeting, that in more than 3 directions, or at least in 3 directions, live near your operations, but at I think, importantly higher elevations. How will you protect them?
The 3D modeling accounts for elevation. It's included in those models. We get the elevational data in a GIS file or a CAD file from the engineering companies that design the well pads, or Olympus, just depends on the scenario. They provide us that. We take that data and plug it into the software, and that software takes all of those lines, all of those elevations, and makes millions and millions of calculations on all of those things.
Okay, so it's probabilistic, but are you saying then that your 25-foot barrier at the site will also serve to protect from excess sound? People at how high? What would you say? What is the extreme?
It depends on the distance. It depends on how high, where they're located. I mean, there's just so many variables that to give it a, how much is a really difficult thing to answer.
Could you tell me what you have presented here in your graphics? What elevation are you presenting? What is the highest elevation for which you can say that sound will be not exceeding those 60 or so decibels? Whatever.
Well, I mean, we've used the elevation of the actual locations. I mean, are they going to be, above their homes? Or, I mean, the elevations of the receiver.
People in the area who have homes that have a greater elevation than your wellheads.
Sure.
Okay, so my question is, these noises are produced and they begin to radiate out. Does your model take these residents into account?
Yeah.
So you're saying, I just want to be clear, because I'm going to be asked this.
Sure, yeah, no worries.
These folks that live up on the ridges around there, they're protected.
They're among your 36 receivers.
Yeah, and if there's something else that's not pinned that you'd like, we can pin it and get, some data points for you.
I might take you up on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries.
I have a follow-up question to that, and I know you guys touched on this a little bit before, but I just kind of want to refresh me as well as everybody else.
Sure.
So you did the modeling. What if your modeling is wrong and there's a complaint? Or even if your modeling is right and there's a complaint, what is the procedure to walk through that to make sure that the resident who is concerned about the noise, who's going to convey that noise to them, or the findings, and is there additional testing that's done specifically for that?
Yeah, so to address noise complaints, we receive a complaint. We will send out, our contractor will set up a sound monitor and typically do a 72-hour survey. During that time, all those sound levels will be recorded, so you can actually listen to see if it's something that was caused from us or somebody just driving by in their lawnmower, things like that. That's just common practice, and we've done that.
Okay, so it is something that if a resident comes up and calls your hotline, or we get a call and say, hey, call the hotline, and then you will take that information and then do an individual monitoring of that specific location.
Yeah, we'll contact the landowner, discuss with them to get things set up.
Okay.
One follow-up question, in regards to, one of your exemption requests was to not put the pine trees in. Now that location has been clarified for you, will you still be asking for the exemption, or will you be providing a landscaping plan showing that plantings around the well pad fence?
So typically, so a couple of issues with planning around the well pad. Safety reasons, being able to visible to see what's going on there. Secondly, stability reasons on banks and things like that. We also have our DEP requirements, as well as getting the site vegetated and adequate vegetation so to control erosion sedimentation. Obviously, we have our perimeter controls for initial construction, but we need to get that site stabilized with 70% vegetative cover. And then planting trees too on hillsides and stuff is just not good for those type of pads. It can hurt the stability of the pad itself. We do a lot of geotechnical reports, things like that, to build that pad, so anything that could, cause issues with that.
John and I took a tour of your site about a year ago, and I think that gentleman there led the tour. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
One thing I would ask, if you're still gonna ask for the exemption on the bulk of the fence, once everything's done and stabilized, the only thing that really remains is equipment that's usually in one corner. Can that be screened?
It's another issue with our site security. We have our cameras up so we can see the whole site.
I'm not talking inside the pad, I'm talking from outside the pad.
Outside the pad. We'll have our fence up. It usually is still a safety concern, any sort of, and wind concern, something I've never done or seen anywhere, quite honestly.
Consider it.
Can I, just real quick too, just to throw this out, I mean, because this is a zoning code provision, it's not something that either the board or the planning commission has the ability to exempt, so to speak. So I mean, I guess we may, and this is something we could continue discussion on if you believe there's a preemption argument, but just so everyone's aware, there can't be just an exemption, that this sort of provision would need a variance if the applicant can't comply, or we can't find another way around that. So just so for the planning commissions, make sure everybody understands too.
I did just want to bring up one more thing about the screening. On the screening shots that were provided, I do believe that there was, adequate screening at certain times of the year, but it wasn't all evergreens. So at a large portion of the year, whenever everything loses its leaves, there may be some screening issues that you think that your perimeter is well screened. When the leaves go down, it's not going to be well screened. So that should be also addressed as far as if you're going to use that as an exemption of, well, we are screened. You are when you took the pictures, but it's not always going to be like that. Mr. Banks, did you happen to see any of those screening pictures?
I did. The question on that though is that, we were referencing sight lines, certain elevations, it's just not feasible to screen from the wellhead. And that was referenced several times, the wellhead. I think what the township's concerned about is the fencing and what people are gonna see, which is the pad, not the wellhead. So a question to me would be, where are the sight lines, the elevations we're looking at? Are they from the wellhead or from the pad itself?
They're from locations around in the general vicinity of each site that public would have access to. So like along roads surrounding the sites, we looked at areas where we thought there could potentially be some level of view shed to each of the well pads, and we provided a sight line and a photograph from each of those.
To the pads?
To the pads itself.
Because earlier we were specific on wellheads.
No, we went the opposite direction. So if you look at the attachments in the application, it wasn't to stand at the wellhead and take photographs from there to the public. It was from the public to the well pad itself. So the grading.
Well, I'm just clarifying,
Yeah.
because in the presentation, we referred to it as the wellhead.
Understood.
But I think the concern for the general public is the pad. At the end of the day, after construction goes on, we have an 8-foot, now a 24-foot high wall on one of those, sides.
No, that won't be permanent. That'll just be during operations.
Okay.
Once we're done there.
We
it'll
have an
be
8-foot high barbed wire, if we approve it, on top fence.
Yeah, chain link fence, right?
Chain link fence that
Right.
we have to look at. And we're not gonna see it.
We'll review them, just make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the intent was to, if I understood the intent of the ordinance, it was to make sure that the public couldn't see the operations, not, standing on the well pad looking at the public. So that was the direction.
And I understand, the public looking at it, but the public's also looking at, and we do have buffer requirements too. In our ordinance, from residential districts to commercial site and industrial site, which you are, right? We also have parking requirement
Last I heard was 2 to 3 trucks after construction be coming into, so we have parking associated with that. Obviously, in the pad, you can't have any trees in the pad because it's a safety and you can't have that. But we're talking about big sites that are graded. The DEP requires establishment, you know, to that. You can establish with trees on slopes. It's just not Berkwood trefoil because they approve it. I mean, you can't do those things. Something to look at.
Well, I would ask that, obviously would like to have an opportunity to view this site prior to next meeting. Is that something that we think we could arrange?
As long as landowners are.
Could you
comfortable.
coordinate that with Bill, please, and they'll contact us and we'll come up with a mutual time?
Yep.
One other question on the noise impactment assessment. Is this assuming all of that was on the pad?
All of what?
The noise generated?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, we get provided a layout of general equipment that's going to be on there, and then we have sound signatures that we have for those, and then we place them in those locations on the pad.
I understand. So if we truck in water, and we've got 50 trucks staged on the roads coming into that, does that change what that modeling would be?
Yeah, the trucks like that are not included.
Okay, so we don't know, again, if on the Leto pad it's out to Oak Road, we have 50 trucks idling out there, that model's gonna expand.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to be idling.
They're all gonna shut off.
We would probably have them shut off, yeah.
You never have that many trucks at one time.
Yeah,
We're
we never
talking
have
about a
that.
lot of trucks on the road, it might be 10, and they're just constantly kind of going back and forth. You never want them stacking up like
Yeah.
that.
But 10 going back and forth, that wouldn't change the modeling though that is shown here.
Well, Tage can comment to this, but on our studies that we've done in the past, there's a reason why, every township, ordinance I've seen, DEP, other ones, always exempt truck traffic because there's no way you can do that. That's the loudest thing that can happen sometimes. Like when we've had monitors out monitoring ahead of time to see what the ambient is, a pickup truck goes by, a regular truck, and you're well above whatever ordinance there is. There's a reason why truck traffic isn't. But there is rules and stuff on idling trucks. You never want to have 50 trucks on the lease road just sitting there idling. The most you would have is on the school bus time frame, maybe have 4 or 5 trucks that stack up there, and we actually instruct them, they do shut them down. And I will say if it's 0 degrees outside, you turn it on, warm it up, and kick it back off. But you don't idle that much, you keep at it.
Does our ordinance specifically exempt the truck traffic?
From noise?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not mentioned in it. It's typically just the facilities on the site.
Okay, does it mention how to model that in the ordinance? Does it say that it exempts that, or does it say that it includes it, or is it just, doesn't mention it at all?
There's no mention of truck traffic as far as modeling is concerned.
What about when, trucks offload the pumps on the trucks? and they
You mean
offload
on
the
site?
water?
I mean, we could certainly add trucks, it's just never, been one of the things that comes up. Typically, when you're running into like sand cans or whatever, if they're pumping, that's the loudest component of it. So while that noise would be included in the overall noise, it's mostly just swallowed up because it's not the most impactful.
Are you opposed to blowing off the sand?
Usually water is louder than the steam.
based on the information that we received tonight, I think we need some time to assimilate this, and you need some time to research some of your things and provide us with some additional information. I would suggest that we consider tabling this until next month, have an opportunity to review the site, get some information or feedback from them as regards to what specifically what their exemption requests are and who they're to, if they're to us or to the zoning hearing board. And I would encourage you to get together with our solicitor and maybe come up with a foundation of a developer's agreement that something we could look at
To be clear, Mr.
Well-
Chairman, are you suggesting perhaps some conditions of approval that we might start to negotiate? Is that along those
Yes.
lines? Okay.
Yes. I think that, we've gone over a lot of things tonight, and, we've asked some questions. You've said you're gonna look into it, so we'll be looking for some answers on some of those things. Any other comments by anybody in the audience or anything, wish to say anything before we consider action tonight? Okay, I would, be open to a motion.
We table this until our next meeting, pending, receipt and review of